Hello, and thank you for joining me back for our weekly midweek Bible study. Great to have you with me. Catching up from last week when we had to postpone things, so we got a little bit of catching up to do, but I think we'll be able to get through about 3 chapters of Isaiah today. So we'll see how that goes. 1 second, let me get all of my stuff up here. Okay, cool. All right. So, well, just kind of like as I always remind you, as part of these Bible studies, is I encourage your feedback, your participation. Please use the live chat to ask any questions you might have, any comments, any clarifications you need, if you need me to slow down, if whatever. So the more participation, the more fun it is for everybody, and especially tonight. Although actually I'm not sure because what we're going to be going through, Isaiah chapters 21 through 23, is kind of a little bit harder understanding, and the Hebrew is a little bit hard to get through, but it's also a section where there's not a lot of scholarly agreement on what some of it is referring to. So we've got 3 or 4 oracles that we're going to get through. And, they're not exactly clear, and it's not completely obvious what some of it is talking about, which is not, it's not a bad thing. It's kind of something that you should sort of expect. There's over 2,000 years of distance between us and these prophecies. And so certainly when Isaiah uses certain language, certain words, referring to certain things in certain ways, it's informed by a lot of things, especially informed by the things that the people of that time would understand. And I use this example whenever I talk about the book of Revelation, is that to decode kind of what a lot of Revelation is talking about, you have to understand the shared history of the people. And so the imagery that's used there would be meaningful to them. So for us, if we were to want to get across this kind of very coded kind of message and infuse it with a lot of meaning, we might use a lot of contemporary examples, a lot of contemporary ideas that, and particularly that we in Michigan, United States, in the year 2021, that we would be able to understand. So maybe some local references that even in today's time, people across the country might not understand. We might refer to other things going on and use that, or even things in our shared history within the last 50, 100 years or so. Imagine people 2,000 years from today looking back at what we'd be writing now and trying to decipher, what the heck, what are we referring to? Some of it's like, okay, I get that, but a lot of it might be a little bit confusing. Basically what we're going to be dealing with tonight. So definitely have some ideas and some good discussion to be had about it, but don't worry too much if it's kind of confusing. It's kind of it's going to be, and you're not wrong to be confused. So let us then get right into it. All right, Isaiah chapter 21. Let us go. All right. So beginning with the first verse of chapter 21. The oracle concerning the wilderness of the sea, or the wilderness near the sea. As whirlwinds in the Negeb sweep on, it comes from the wilderness, from a terrible land. Okay, so what we will learn as we get into this is that this is going to be an oracle about Babylon, okay? Which is interesting because Babylon is not by the sea. It is the river Euphrates goes right through it, but Babylon itself is nowhere near the sea. Now, if you look at the Babylonian Empire as it rises to power and expands, there are certainly areas of the Babylonian Empire that touch the sea, that touch the Mediterranean Sea, that touch the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf. Yeah, but Babylon itself is not near the sea. So it's kind of interesting why, if it's an oracle about Babylon, why is he calling it the wilderness of the sea? And what we're going to see is that a lot of this is going to be some figurative, even poetic language that Isaiah is going to use to describe this. So one of the ideas that's thrown out there is that, if you're looking at, Babylon might have been looked upon, could have been, I suppose, as, it's situated on a desert plain, so kind of out in the wilderness, and there's this river that flows through it that brings life to it. It's like they were so very much dependent on the Euphrates River. So maybe, to see it as the city that, kind of like a ship out at sea, and that kind of like the city floats on the river and the canals in the wilderness, kind of like a ship at sea. Sure. When you come down to it, this is really referenced in poetry and poetic language. So, you can pretty much dress it up however you like. At the end of the day, when we go through this is talking about Babylon. So, that he refers to it as the wilderness of the sea can mean a lot of different things. Not necessarily something that we want to get hung up on. So he's talking about this oracle concerning Babylon, and something comes from the wilderness, from a terrible land, and it is going to be like as the whirlwinds that come up from the south. And these storms that the people of Israel or Judah rather, would understand as whirlwinds coming up from the south in the Negeb. These are very devastating storms, and that would kind of sweep in and do a lot of damage. So something is coming to bring judgment to Babylon. Okay, this has been the recurring theme throughout all of these oracles. So moving on, verses 2 through 5. A stern vision is told to me. The traitor betrays and a destroyer destroys. Go up, O Elam, lay siege. O Media, all the sighing she has caused I bring to an end. Therefore my loins are filled with anguish. Pangs have seized me like the pangs of a woman in labor. I am bowed down so that I cannot hear. I am dismayed so that I cannot see. My heart staggers. Horror has appalled me. The twilight I long for has been turned for me into trembling. They prepare the table. They spread the rugs. They eat. They drink. Arise, O princes, oil the shield. Okay, so what we have here is this vision that Isaiah is seeing. A stern vision is told me. It's something that he's very, very difficult, very kind of causes him a lot of pain and anguish. This vision, and Elam and Media go up and lay siege to Babylon. So basically, he has this vision of the armies of Persia, led by Cyrus. Would be led by Cyrus later on, coming up to leading the armies of the Medes and Persians against Babylon. Okay, so he has this terrifying vision of Babylon's judgment. Now, why this begins to get challenging is because we're looking at this in terms of, okay, this is about Babylon. All right, well, is he seeing a vision of when Cyrus of Persia comes in and conquers Babylon, which will happen in 539 BC, okay? Or is this a vision kind of more of possibly of the end of time? Because if you go to the book of Revelation, Babylon is a very common stand-in for the enemies of God. So in Revelation, you read a lot of things about Babylon the Great, Babylon the Mighty, whatever, and Babylon being judged. Babylon is kind of scriptural shorthand for the enemies of God. So, and what we already know about the way these kind of biblical prophecies work and how the prophetic mind and understanding of these things is that it encompasses not only looking to the immediate future of when this thing will happen in one way, but also at the same time bringing in a look to the far future, so like the end times. So is Isaiah seeing a vision of something that's going to happen in 100 years, give or take, or something that's going to happen at the end of time? Yes, it's likely both. It's likely a blend of these two things we're going to talk about some kind of generic visions of judgment that will come upon Babylon as the existing nation back then, but also it refers to the judgment of God's enemies on the last day. It's all going to kind of just blend in together, and so that's really what we're looking at here. Isaiah is just sickened by what he sees. It gives him physical pain, and it comes rapidly and quickly, and kind of catches everybody off guard. So he says, they prepare the table, they spread the rugs, they eat and drink. Arise, O princes, oil the shield. Babylon is kind of caught off guard. They're in the middle of eating and drinking, and these armies are upon them. So there is some historical precedent for when the armies did come to conquer Babylon, but I think it's more safe to just kind of look at it in terms of a kind of a generic sort of, judgment will come when you least expect it. Basically, kind of what Jesus talks a lot about, how you don't know the day or the hour, but be prepared, because it will come like a thief in the night. Same kind of concept. I think that's a safe way of understanding what Isaiah is seeing here. All right, so moving on from that, verses 6 through 10. For thus the Lord said to me, go set a watchman, let him announce what he sees. When he sees riders, horsemen in pairs, riders on donkeys, riders on camels, let him listen diligently, very diligently. Then he who saw cried out, upon a watchtower I stand, O Lord, continually by day, and at my post I am stationed whole nights. And behold, here come riders, horsemen in pairs. And he answered, fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the carved images of her gods he has shattered to the ground. O my threshed and winnowed one, what I have heard from the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I announce to you. All right, so this part of this vision is kind of this now a man who is assigned to watch, be alert, which again fits very much into the kinds of things that Jesus talks about as far as the end. Be aware, don't fall asleep, be ready. And so he sees basically the idea is the image, the watchman sees this army go by, this army heading up to Babylon to conquer them. And then he sees another, some more riders, horsemen in pairs, coming with a message. And they have the announcement that Babylon has fallen. Fallen is Babylon, which connects with Revelation. The same kind of stuff that we hear declared in John's Revelation. So that's why I think it's probably a good bet that this is kind of a, I don't want to say a loose prophecy, but I mean not something terribly specific to a certain time period, but more of a kind of a broad sort of prophetic announcement. So this is good news for the people of God, especially if you're looking at it in terms of Babylon of the time. So the people who would be exiled into Babylon, this prophecy is good news for them, because what that means is that they are about to be released from captivity, that they'll be allowed to return home, which, again, applies just as well to the people of God on the last day. Because on the last day, when Jesus returns and Babylon is judged, the enemies of God are judged and conquered once and for all, the people of God are released from the captivity of sin. Ultimately, I mean, certainly we are through the cross, but I mean, that is when sin is completely done away with, the new creation and all this is ushered in, and we're allowed to return to our true home, which is in the new heavens and new earth, in the presence of God. So, again, you can definitely look at this in a bigger sense than just an oracle about Babylon as a country of that time, or anything like that. So. Before we move on to 11 and 12, which is a real quick little oracle, are there any questions about the oracle against Babylon or concerning Babylon? If that one is sitting well, if that seems to be clear, and that you have You feel like you're grasping that and working with it. That's good. Keep that mindset as we go through these next ones, because it's going to be kind of a similar thing where it's you could look at it in terms of immediate prophecy, and by immediate I mean within the next 100, 200 years that Isaiah is looking at. But it also works in a grand kind of scheme too. So if you're all good with that so far, this will be no problem. So the next oracle, which is just 2 verses long, oracle concerning Edom. Okay. How do we know it's Edom? The oracle concerning Duma. Hold on. One is calling to me from Seir. Watchman, what time of the night? Watchman, what time of the night? The watchman says, morning comes, and also the night. If you inquire, inquire. Come back again. The end. All right, so it begins with the oracle concerning Duma. How is it at Edom? Well, the next bit, one is calling to me from Seir, is that is another name for the region of Edom. So the Duma there is a little bit, in the Hebrew, it's a little bit of a play on words. Basically, what happens is they change the name Edom slightly to Duma, which means silence. Okay, so there's this kind of this motif of silence, whatever, going on here. And what the oracle is presented as is as a riddle. Okay, it's very vague. it's not very clear at all. So you've got this dealing with Edom, which is Judah's neighbor to the immediate south. And if you look at it in the context of all the other oracles, okay, so you've got all these oracles have been judgment from God upon various nations. Okay, and now beginning with the previous oracle that we read was the valley of what was it, the wilderness by the sea, the desert by the sea, whatever. And now the oracle concerning Duma. All the other oracles named the places that they were concerning. Now these later oracles are in a different format. They're using different titles, unusual titles, a little bit harder to understand. They're veiled a little bit. So tying, because they're kind of grouped together with these similar things, we want to kind of tie them together and see this kind of progression with these oracles. So, with the Oracle of Babylon, we had a watchman who was installed to kind of keep watch, to look out for these armies and to receive the messages. So now, basically, this watchman who's seen an army march towards Babylon, the Persian army, has now heard this announcement that Babylon has fallen. So we have this idea that, okay, well, God's judgment is coming to Babylon. God is bringing his judgment. All right. So now, in Edom, it seems like their judgment is coming to them as well. And so this man from Edom, or this one from Edom, says, "Watchman, what time of the night? Watchman, what time of the night?" Which is kind of a way of saying, how much longer? Okay, is it over yet? So the idea being is that there's a judgment that is bearing down on Edom, and it's the question of, like, how much longer do we have to endure this? When will this end? When will this destruction end? So that's kind of what the guy is saying here. And the response is, well, morning comes, so there's a bit of hope. You know, what time of night? How long? How long will this terrible night continue? And the response is, well, the morning's coming, so there's a bit of hope, but not so much, because with the morning then also comes the night again, or that the morning is night. So even the relief is going to be more of the same. So only a brief little respite from the judgment. So, what do we make of this? Well, what's likely going on here is this example of this one from Edom who recognizes the pain and destruction caused by this judgment, and they want relief, but they only want temporal relief. They just want the pain to stop now. They don't really care about what it would really take for true relief, which is repentance, turning to God. They're only concerned with themselves. There is relief, certainly, in repentance, but they just don't want to do it. So this if you will inquire, is this kind of invitation to ask again. So the person seeking relief is like, how long? And they're like, well, if you want to ask, then ask again. Come back again. Ask the right question, which is essentially kind of the coded way of saying, like, you're not seeking true relief. All you're seeing is, the armies in front of you. You're not seeing the true judgment of unbelief. You're not seeing that you're not turning to God. So, if you want to inquire again. Come back again and see if you get it right this time. See if you understand what I'm talking about here. And what we kind of see here is kind of how Jesus talks in parables. How he will disguise his teachings so that those who understand and believe, they will understand. Those who don't, they will not understand. So this is kind of what's most likely going on with this this brief oracle, in that it's kind of giving this picture of how people, generally speaking, they'll turn to God when disaster strikes. When horrible things happen, that's when the churches fill up. We turn to God because, we can't deal with this, so might as well turn to God. But then when life gets back to normal, when things even out, when things are good, then those churches empty out again. Because people are like, see, everything's fine. We don't need God. And so you kind of got the same sort of vibe going on here, where this person is experiencing the effects of this judgment, but they can't really, they don't see why. They want relief from it, but they don't know how that's possible. Because they're just, they don't get it. They don't understand. So that's most likely what's going on there. It's difficult because, you've got 2 verses for this oracle, and it is written as a riddle. So to say that it's perfectly clear is, well, that would be a disservice. But I think you can make some reasonable insights into this and see what's going on given the context of all the other oracles. So I will pause then for any questions on this one, the oracle concerning Edom. I'm sure you all got that, no problem, right? All right, because we've got, let's see, two more oracles to go. Making good time here so far. All right. 3 oracles. Oh boy. Well, next one's a short one too. All right. Well, we will move on. The next oracle, verses 13 through 17. The oracle concerning Arabia. In the thickets in Arabia you will lodge, O caravans of Dedanites. To the thirsty bring water, meet the fugitive with bread, O inhabitants of the land of Tema. For they have fled from the swords, from the drawn sword, from the bent bow, and from the press of battle. For thus the Lord said to me, within a year, according to the years of a hired worker, all the glory of Kedar will come to an end. And the remainder of the archers of the mighty men of the sons of Kedar will be few, for the Lord, the God of Israel, has spoken. Okay. So, this is, again, continuing on this kind of theme of this unknown invader is coming through and just conquering and bringing war and battle and death and destruction. So now through to the people of Arabia. Okay. So we encounter some fugitives, to the thirsty bring water, meet the fugitive with bread. So, we get this picture of there's all these fugitives from battle, people who are hungry and thirsty. It's just kind of the images you get is of devastation. The Kedar. Let's see. The glory of Kedar, the sons of Kedar. Kedar was a general term for the nomads of the region, what we would probably call Bedouins, who were skilled archers. So we get this whole the remainder of the archers of the mighty men of the sons of Kedar will be few. So essentially, we have this oracle that talks about a judgment on concerning Arabia that comes to these sons of Kedar, and yeah, there's not that much to go on. We really, some of the other oracles you can kind of maybe pinpoint some of the events that they might be referring to, or at least make an educated guess. This gives us absolutely nothing. And keep in mind that if we're trying to pin this to a date or an event, we're talking about events that happened 2,500 years ago. So, yeah, to a bunch of nomadic people who probably, weren't spending a lot of time in one place, leaving a lot of historical records. So it's just, there's really no way to pin this to anything. So again, we have kind of this generic, vague, nebulous sort of prophecy about a judgment concerning the enemies of God. So it just, and really we're just filling out the picture of, we're getting a picture of all the nations surrounding Judah. So you have Judah, all the enemies of God who are surrounding them. So Arabia is another portion of that. So where God is announcing judgment on all the enemies that surround them. And if you go back, and you look at what Isaiah was dealing with and the people of Judah were dealing with, they were surrounded by enemies. They were fearful. The problem, well, one of the problems is that the people of Judah were trying to make alliances with all these foreign nations, even like alliances with Egypt, who, the people of God in Egypt had some conflicts in their past, and yet they were trying to align themselves with Egypt to form a mutual kind of protection against the Assyrians. So, they're surrounded by enemies. And so for the people of Judah to hear this, they're hearing the judgment of God coming against all the enemies that surround them. So this is, they're feeling probably like, okay, God is in control. God is going to take care of us. That's the takeaway here. Maybe. All right, we have a comment here from my mom. Hi, Mom. Is Isaiah proclaiming these oracles to just the Israelites as examples of what will happen to these other people, or is he proclaiming it to them as well? Good comment, and that's what I was just alluding to. Good, you're tracking. Yes, Isaiah is. He's writing these oracles to the people of Judah. He's not like, writing this down and sending it with a messenger to Arabia, to Edom. He's not doing that. These are prophecies that he's being given to give to the people of Judah. So as they're hearing this, certainly they're hearing about God's judgment to other nations. So this is like, oh, okay, God, this is what's going to happen to them. Okay, so probably filling them with a certain amount of like relief, like, oh, thank God, he's going to deal with those people, our enemies. Thank you, Lord. Okay, so it works on that level. However, as we get into Isaiah 22 and the next oracle, what we're going to learn is this is the oracle concerning the Valley of Vision. See, another kind of vague name. Well, this is very much painfully obvious as we go through it, is an oracle concerning Jerusalem. Okay, so as they hear all these oracles of the people surrounding them, the enemies of God, well, now comes an oracle against them. And so this is where it gets real for them, where if there was any delight that they were getting from hearing about the judgment of other people, this is where it's like, not good. So yeah, the oracles for God's people about judgment of other nations are certainly to give them the idea and understanding that God is in control, that God is in charge of these things. But it's always also going to come back to them to be like, and you are not believing in him. You think this is great, but you don't even trust in him. So why are you getting excited about this? So we'll get into that. So verses 1 through 4, Isaiah 22. The oracle concerning the valley of vision. What do you mean that you've gone up, all of you, to the housetops, you who are full of shoutings, tumultuous city, exultant town? Your slain are not slain with the sword or dead in battle. All your leaders have fled together. Without the bow they were captured. All of you who were found were captured, though they had fled far away. Therefore I said, look away from me. Let me weep bitter tears. Do not labor to comfort me concerning the destruction of the daughter of my people. Okay, as I said, we're going to learn that this is about Jerusalem. So, Valley of Vision, what does that mean? Well, again, it's an interesting title, calling Jerusalem the Valley of Vision, considering that Jerusalem is built on a hill, not a valley. However, if you do if you pull back a bit and look at Jerusalem situated in what it's surrounded by, Jerusalem can be seen as being in a valley, even though it is upon a hill, because the surrounding hills are higher. Think about Jesus, looking down at Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. Okay, so outside of Jerusalem. So you could see Jerusalem as a valley, even though it technically is on a hill. As for vision, well, I mean, the focus of many of God's prophecies and visions are centered in Jerusalem. So, the Valley of Vision, Jerusalem, no problem. So, oracles. These oracles are all about God's enemies, so why now Jerusalem? Well, like I said, they were turning to everything else except God to protect them. They had abandoned God. They chose to no longer be his people. They decided that they were not going to rely on God. When Isaiah goes to King Ahaz and says, ask God a sign. He's like, oh, no, I won't put God to the test. Even though God is saying, look, ask me for a sign, I'll give you one, so that you trust in me. And Ahaz is like, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. They don't want to turn to God. The kings of Judah will try to align themselves with all sorts of foreign nations for their protection, rather than turn to God. So, this is why the oracle is now going against Jerusalem, because the people have abandoned God. So an enemy comes, surrounds Jerusalem. And it's interesting because there's the reaction is mixed. You who are full of shoutings, tumultuous city. So tumultuous, the word there is, it's in chaos. It is, torn asunder, and yet it is exultant. It is excited. So you've got this really weird contrast of a response, fear and excitement, joy and anguish coming together, which makes a lot of sense when you look at what the people were doing and who they were trusting in. You've got like the I'm sorry, brain just turned off for a moment. Anyway, Syria. Syria is the big bad Damascus. They're the ones who are threatening Judah. At the time of Isaiah. And so what Israel wants to do then, and what they will end up doing, is kind of aligning themselves with Assyria to defend them. So, when the Assyrians come, so, and you look at how the people of God make these alliances with foreign nations. So these foreign nations come with their armies to Jerusalem. So there's this mixture of excitement and celebration, because they're like, yay, our friends are here, our protectors are here. And yet anguish, because those armies are now coming to conquer Jerusalem, which is exactly what happened when Assyria and Israel. I'm all over the map. Anyway, Assyria comes and takes Israel into exile. So the exact people who aligned with eventually become the ones who conquer them. So this is why we see this sort of. Sorry, I'm getting all my countries all mixed up, and I'm sorry. So anyway, that's what we got going on here. So again, can you pinpoint this to a particular event? Could be talking about the Assyrian siege against Judah, which was not successful. It could be talking about the Babylonian exile. Okay. Or this is the way I kind of go with this, is a general view of the destruction of the people who have turned from God. So, final judgment, the last day, whatever. Which actually then makes sense because you've got Jerusalem, which is the home of God's people. And so when this judgment comes, there's fear and excitement. Well, you would have the believers who are excited about this. They're like, thank God this world is coming to an end and a new one is beginning. Yay. Meanwhile, at the same time, those who don't believe are terrified, as rightfully so. Comment here, kind of like when they went to Egypt, they were happy to be saved from the famine, but ended up becoming enslaved. Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's kind of strange how that's an ongoing theme, and we can see this played out in our own lives too, where the things that if we are not putting our trust in God, the things that we're putting our trust in will turn out to, it won't end well. It will become something that usually just brings despair, destruction, yada yada yada. No good things come from that. So that's usually the way it plays out. All right. Verses 5 through 8. For the Lord God of hosts has a day of tumult and trampling and confusion in the valley of vision, a battering down of walls and a shouting to the mountains. And Elam bore the quiver and chariot with chariots and horsemen, and Kir uncovered the shield. Your choicest valleys were full of chariots, and the horsemen took their stand at the gates. He has taken away the covering of Judah. So the enemy is going to batter down the walls. The people will cry out. They'll cry to the mountains, and no help will come. Because they're crying out to mountains. There's nothing there. So the comment here that the battering down of the walls, this definitely wouldn't be the Assyrian siege, because the Assyrians didn't destroy the walls. Could be Babylon, because they definitely destroyed the walls. Could be Rome. Rome destroyed the walls of Jerusalem. Could be all these things. But again, general destruction, general chaos of judgment, where are we? There we go. Okay. Judgment of the enemies of God. Okay, moving on. Verses 8 through 13. In that day you looked to the weapons of the house of the forest, or the palace of the forest, and you saw that the breaches of the city of David were many. You collected the waters of the lower pool, and you counted the houses of Jerusalem, and you broke down the houses to fortify the wall. You made a reservoir between the two walls for the water of the old pool, but you did not look to him who did it, or see him who planned it long ago. In that day the Lord God of hosts called for weeping and mourning, for baldness and wearing sackcloth. And behold, joy and gladness, killing oxen and slaughtering sheep, eating flesh and drinking wine. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. All right, so palace of the forest, house of the forest, palace of the forest. Basically, the palace of the forest was a palace that Solomon had built, and he had built it out of the cedars of Lebanon, thus the name Palace of the Forest, where they got the trees. It was an armory, but also a storehouse for a lot of Solomon's treasures. So the house of the forest was kind of a symbol of the past glory of the people of God, a source of their pride and confidence. And here now they're just kind of they're running to it and raiding it in order to defend themselves. They're shoring up their defenses. They're tearing down houses. They're counting houses so they can figure out which ones to tear down to reinforce the walls. They're doing everything they can possibly do to defend themselves, to protect themselves, except turning to God. See, everything they're doing, not once do they turn to God. And here we go. You made a reservoir between the two walls for the water of the old pool, but you didn't look to him who did it, who provided those things for you, or see him who planned it long ago. You didn't turn to God. You completely left him out of this whole thing. So God's desire in that day, the Lord God called for weeping and mourning. So he called for repentance. That is what God wanted. That was the response he wanted. But instead, what did they get? The people in gladness and joy, just kept on partying. Said, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Just whatever. Let's just enjoy the moment. Let's live in the moment and enjoy it, because, tomorrow, whatever. Yeah, no concern whatsoever for God or what he desired for them. And he desired to save them. He desired to bring them life. And they traded that for an evening of food and wine. Food and good drink. Not the best trade-off there. All right. And verse 14, the Lord of hosts has revealed himself in my ears. Surely this iniquity will not be atoned for until you die, says the Lord God of hosts. This is pretty harsh, because he's saying you are dead. You are dead in your trespasses. And your iniquity, your unbelief, there's no atoning for it. And don't go too far with that, saying like, what? But Christ died for the sins of the world. Yes, certainly. But in unbelief, you reject it. And so if you die in unbelief, there's no atonement. So I mean, if you are in utter abject unbelief all the days of your life, and then you die, well, there's no atonement for you. I mean, it's there, and it was given to you, but you completely rejected it. You threw it away. So this is the severity of what Isaiah is dealing with here. And again, it's not necessarily just the people of that time. I mean, he's talking to any of the enemies of God, anyone who doesn't believe. This is the same thing that would happen on the last day, where the Lord of hosts says, surely this iniquity will not be atoned for until you die. You are going to die in your unbelief, and you are condemning yourself. And that is not good. All right, verses 15 through 19. Thus says the Lord God of hosts, come to this steward, to Shebna, who is over the household, and say to him, what have you to do here? And whom have you here, that you have cut out here a tomb for yourself? You who cut out a tomb on the height and carve a dwelling for yourself in the rock? Behold, the Lord will hurl you away violently. O you strong man, he will seize firm hold on you, and whirl you around and throw you like a ball into a wide land. There you shall die, and there shall be your glorious chariots, you shame of your master's house. I will thrust you from your office, and you will be pulled down from your station. So this actually ends the section of poetry that the oracle had been written in, and now he tacks on this kind of epilogue, this sort of, and this definitely is dealing with somebody who is currently alive and currently dealing with this Shebna, who was in charge of the palace of the Palace of the Forest, House of the Forest, whatever. In charge of the palace. He was the administrator for domestic affairs there. He was second only to the king, so he was pretty high up. And the example we have here is that he's an example of the love of luxury and the arrogant attitudes of the people of Jerusalem. And obviously he's consumed with his own sense of importance. He's looking for himself. He's carving out himself a grand place for him to be buried in when he dies. So he's all full of himself. And basically, it's just kind of a tacked on sort of. Especially if you're looking at it in terms of the oracle is about a future judgment, and then God brings it very, very directly to point it at this one individual that Isaiah is going to be dealing with, to say, like, yeah, this judgment is not just hypothetical. This judgment is not just like, oh, it's going to happen someday. It's like, I'm in charge of things, and I'm going to be cleaning house now. So this dude, I'm going to take him and toss him away. Which is exactly what is going to happen. Because in the continuation there, in that day, I will call my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, and I will clothe him with your robe, and will bind your sash on him, and will commit your authority to his hand. And he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to the house of Judah. And I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He shall open, and none shall shut. And he shall shut, and none shall open. and I will fasten him like a peg in a secure place, and he will become a throne of honor to his father's house. And they will hang on him the whole honor of his father's house, the offspring and the issue, every small vessel from the cups to all the flagons. So he will give Shebna's position to Eliakim, who will serve God well, who will be a better representative. So, yeah, there's really not, that one's not too hard. And finally, finishing off this oracle, in that day, declares the Lord of hosts, the peg that was fastened, Eliakim, in a secure place will give way, and it will be cut down and fall, and the load that was on it will be cut off, for the Lord has spoken. So essentially, things will go well with Eliakim until they don't go well. When he no longer serves for the welfare of the people, but begins to look after his own welfare over those, then he will lose his position. Basically, it's a weird kind of, we have this like, oracle to the nations, oracle to the nations, oracle to the nations, and then oracle against that guy. And I'll replace him, but even that guy, it's kind of jarring how it goes from the very general to the hyper focused. But I mean, all of this is really trying to get across this kind of, in a macro sense, God is in charge. God is guiding the affairs of the world. God is bringing whatever he needs to bring, be it judgment or prosperity. He is the one in charge of it. He is moving all the pieces. Big picture. All the way down to individual, boom, micromanage on a very personal level. God is in charge. God is choosing who will serve him and in what capacity and for how long. He decides who and how and how long and when and all this stuff. He's in charge from everything from the great to the small. And that's probably the best way to understand this kind of contrast where we go from nations to Shebna. Because Hebrew is actually, this is a thing that Hebrew does, is likes to contrast things from opposite ends of the spectrum, or going from the biggest to the smallest in order to kind of get across the idea of the full all-encompassing. So from the least to the greatest and everything in between. So everything. So likely that is what is trying to get across there. And we have just about a few more minutes, and I think we can get through this next bit. So I'm just going to keep moving on. If you have any questions, comments whatsoever, please type them in, and I'll address them. So Isaiah 23. Final oracle, the oracle concerning Tyre. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste, without house or harbor. From the land of Cyprus it is revealed to them. All right, so now Tyre and Sidon is what this oracle is going to deal with. Tyre is an interesting kind of situation with all this, because it was an extremely long-lasting city. Great longevity with this place. The oracles began with Babylon, which represented military and governmental power, kind of the power of strength and might. Tyre and Sidon are. Tyre is the capital of Phoenicia. Tyre represents kind of commercial and economic power. They are commerce. They are business. They are the economy, money, essentially. So they represent the power of money. Okay. And so these bookend God's judgment on the powers of the world. He begins with judgment on the powers of the world based on might and strength, and then the powers of the world based on money. So you got basically everything that runs the world, either shoving people around and forcing your own way or buying your own way. So the two greatest, worst powers that we see out there, and God is bringing judgment upon it all. So I said Tyre was a very long-lasting city. Okay, so Tyre was situated in on an island. Okay, so Tyre and Sidon both had excellent harbors to accommodate ships. So they were a very popular trading hub for ships to be coming in and out of. They went to the coast of Africa, to India, to Britain. They established colonies all over the place. Their influence just stretched all over because they were kind of the commerce hub. And so being built on an island, they were kind of protected from land-based armies. It was difficult to conquer Tyre. It's difficult to really do anything with them. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon laid siege to Tyre for 13 years. Okay, didn't destroy it. And finally, after the siege, Tyre recognized the authority of the Babylonians. So it was kind of they kind of, Babylon won, but it was a lot. Later, Alexander the Great laid siege to Tyre for 7 months. So a lot shorter, captured it, didn't destroy it. It was worth too much. So Tyre remained an important commercial center until the time of the Crusades. So, a good, 15, 16, 1700 years after Isaiah. The Crusaders conquered it in 1125 and then destroyed it 150 years later. And so now it's like a little town, I guess. That was the end of Tyre as this commercial whatever. But the point is, Tyre has a lot of history. And a lot of people tried to destroy it and just never could. And this prophecy starts off with Tyre being laid waste. Okay? So the idea is this a prophecy that's fulfilled in the Crusades, or is this a prophecy of the general judgment at the end of time? Guess which way I'm going to go with this. Definitely general. It could be or looking to the time when Tyre will fall during the 1100s, 1200, whatever. But also as a way of looking to the last day, if that makes sense. So, all right. The oracle concerning wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre's laid waste is destroyed. From Lambda of Cyprus it is revealed to them. Oh, I'm skipping ahead here. 2 through 7. There we go. Be still, O inhabitants of the coast, the merchants of Sidon who cross the sea and have filled you. And on many waters your revenue was the grain of Shihor. The harvest of the Nile, you are the merchant of the nations. Be ashamed, O Sidon, for the sea has spoken. The stronghold of the sea, saying, I have neither labored nor given birth. I have neither reared young men nor brought up young women. When the report comes to Egypt, they will be in anguish over the report about Tyre. Cross over to Tarshish. Wail, O inhabitants of the coast. Is this your exultant city, whose origin is from days of old, whose feet carried her to settle her far away? So be still. Be silent. There's nothing to say here. You look at Tyre destroyed, and it's shocking. It's like, oh my gosh, the city that has lasted so long is destroyed. The city that was, the merchants there were treated like royalty because they were so wealthy. Money makes the world go round, right? How the Tyre was too big to fail, and here it is destroyed. So even the sea laments. The sea speaks and says, wow, when this comes to Egypt, there's going to be anguish. And it's just like, wail, inhabitants of the coast. Is this the city whose origins from days of old, who was so revered, so looked upon, so cherished for its wealth? And yet this is what comes of it. So not good. Verses 8 through 10. Who has purposed this against Tyre? The bestower of crowns, whose merchants were princes, whose traders were the honored of the earth. The Lord of hosts has purposed it, to defile the pompous pride of all glory, to dishonor all the honored of the earth. Cross over your land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no restraint anymore. So, Tyre was so powerful, so wealthy, could withstand any attack. Commerce never ended. And yet they're destroyed. Who does this? God does this. God is behind all things. God is in charge of this. He's not moved by our power, by our might. He cannot be bought. And he does it. Why does he bring this judgment? To defile the pompous pride of all glory. to show us that, all these things that we take pride in, that we think are so awesome about ourselves, the things that we've turned to glorify, are nothing. To destroy the idols that we have built up, to crush these false gods that we have placed in our hearts, to once and for all show that he is God, and then hopefully it'll get through our thick heads at some point. But yeah, he is the one who has done this. He has stretched out his hand over the sea. He has shaken the kingdoms. The Lord has given command concerning Canaan to destroy its strongholds. And he said, "You will no more exult, O oppressed virgin daughter of Sidon. Arise, cross over to Cyprus. Even there you will have no rest." So you look at... where are we going here? There was something... sorry. I lost it there. So there's a little bit of... concerning Canaan, or looking at crossing the wilderness to Babylon, cross over to Cyprus, all this stuff. Tyre, with such a long history, was about to be overthrown. Actually, I think I mistranslated something there. I'll get back to... Hold that for a moment. Let's move on here, because I think I screwed up something in my notes. Oh, there we go. I didn't even read the whole thing. That's why. Behold, this isn't right. Behold the land of the Chaldeans. This is the people that was not. Assyria destined it for wild beasts. They erected their siege towers. They stripped her palaces bare. They made her a ruin. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for your stronghold is laid waste. So, behold the land of the Chaldeans. So, the Babylonians. This is the people that was not. Assyria destined it for wild beasts. So, at the time that Isaiah is prophesying, Babylon was not a world power. The power in the region was Assyria. Okay, but the irony here is that Tyre, with such a long and rich history, will be overthrown by a nation that is now nothing but desert. So the Babylonians who laid siege to it, and they will acknowledge Babylon's authority. Babylon will come in and capture it, will claim it as their own, and Babylon isn't even a thing yet. During Isaiah's time, they're just it's a wilderness. There's nothing. So there's the irony here of the great land that it will be reduced to nothing by what is now nothing. So that's where we get some fun stuff. All right, verses 15 through 16. In that day, Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, like the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the prostitute. Take a harp, go about the city, O forgotten prostitute. Make sweet melody, sing many songs that you may be remembered. So it goes from poetry to prose, kind of like it did in the other ones. So now this is prose, out of poetry. And in that, so it talks about how Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years. And at the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the prostitute. Okay. And now it kind of returns. So there's this time, 70 years, or a period of time, in which Tyre will be judged, will be, afflicted, conquered, whatever. Like the days of a king. So where things are kind of... When a king rises to power, he sets things up, and they go that way for his reign, and then once he's dead, then things change. So during these 70 years, Tyre will be judged. Okay, but then after 70 years, things will return, but not exactly the same. Because if we go back, he refers to Tyre as where we go. O oppressed virgin daughter of Sidon. Refers to Tyre as this virgin daughter. Well, now, after these 70 years, no longer a virgin, but a prostitute. So 70 years could be the time period, could be symbolic, could be kind of an allusion to the 70 years of captivity in Babylon. Again, it's not necessarily a specific sort of prophecy pinpointing one moment. It's kind of including a whole bunch of these things, pulling them all together to talk about God's judgment on his enemies. So now Tyre is referenced as a virgin. I mean, a prostitute. That she's been defiled by the Babylonians, by the foreign invaders, and now she is left as a prostitute. So just kind of a very graphic description of what is going to happen. That the defilement of all this, the foreign gods and unbelief, and what it does to people. So there we go. And finally, at the end of 70 years, the Lord will visit Tyre, and she will return to her wages and will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Her merchandise and her wages will be holy to the Lord. It will not be stored or hoarded, but her merchandise will supply abundant food and fine clothing for those who dwell before the Lord. Okay, so Tyre, after it is judged and goes through this time period, whatever, it will return and have, return to commerce. But now the prophet is set apart for the Lord and those who believe, who live before him. And we can see echoes of this in that when the Jews returned from Babylon, they traded food, drink, and oil to the people of Phoenicia, Tyre and Sidon, for cedar from Lebanon, so that they could rebuild the city. When Paul goes on his missionary journeys, he sailed on a Phoenician trip to Tyre, where he found a congregation of believers there. So we see where kind of echoes of that in the New Testament, where, in the Old Testament too, where the people of God are benefiting from the commerce that goes on in Tyre, which is just to say that God will use whatever means he chooses to support his people and to work towards his purposes, even the commerce of this very very worldly city. So we are way over time. So wrapping up here, and again, any comments, questions? I know that the last section is kind of like, oh, okay. If you go back and put all of these oracles together, so we have chapters 13 through 23, 10 judgments, 10 oracles that God revealed on the people around Jerusalem and the people of Jerusalem himself. 10 is kind of that there are 10 oracles is kind of significant because 10 is a very biblically symbolic number. Signifies completeness. So in that we have 10, we get this idea that God, this judgment is complete and total. His judgment on the nations, on the unbelieving world, is total and complete. Okay, so we get that God will bring a complete judgment to the unbelieving world. God is in charge throughout this whole thing. That's been one of the running themes. He controls not only the fates of his people, but the fates of all people. He's bringing judgment to all nations, even the nations that he will use to bring judgment on other nations. He'll bring judgment on. And, these are very difficult oracles. Isaiah has very visceral reactions to these oracles. His heart cries out. He doubles over in pain. He refuses to be consoled. He is so wounded by what he sees. And so the takeaway for us in all of this is that, we're witnessing God's justice. We see that God will not let sin have the final word. God is going to judge sin. And, we need this witness because, it's so easy and tempting for us to look out into the world and say, well, clearly God doesn't judge sin. There's no judgment because I see people, I see sinful people prospering. I see sin just increasing and people flocking to it. Sin seems to be winning the day. Horrible things happen all the time and no justice. We don't see the justice. So this is a reminder to us that, God is, his justice is coming. We see it. It comes. It comes now, but it will be made complete on the last day. So a reminder that God is a God of justice, that though what we see might not always feel like it, we're getting a very small look at the big picture. Also a theme that God holds nations accountable for their actions. That's a big one. You know, God does not just let things fly for all time. You know, there are times when he says, okay, enough's enough. But also that the grace of God is at work in all these judgments. As we go through the oracles, there's always this embedded little bit of hope, and you know, kind of going through these things. So even though the predominant word through this is all law, there is gospel in there. So even when God is bearing His law and bringing it down pretty harshly, but justly and righteously, He's always bringing the gospel. The gospel is always there for those who believe. You know, this is not something that we fear, because we know that this is His judgment on unbelief. So those who have faith, this, you know, we cling to the gospel and say, thanks be to God. Awesome. Wonderful. All right. So there you go. That covers chapters 21 through 23 and closes out this first kind of major section in Isaiah, dealing with these oracles on the nations. So we're a little bit over time. I apologize, but really wanted to get through that. So are there any questions concerning any of this stuff that we talked about tonight? Any comments, thoughts? Are you still there? Anything like that. Not hearing anything. Oh. Comment is, you covered it all very well. Well, thank you. Thank you. I hope so. It's not like I said, it's not too it's challenging, yeah, but I mean, as long as you're kind of taking it all together, you can definitely see how it all works, and it's why when I tell people, you know, the Bible is not that complex. It's not to say that it's not challenging, but there's an inner consistency, and everything works together. So even the parts where, and there are parts that we don't fully understand, which makes perfect sense because, you know, like I said, there are things that are lost because we don't have those little nuggets of shared experience or knowledge or history, whatever, that have been lost to time. But even when we come upon those sections, we have all of the rest of Scripture that comes together to hold that up so that we can understand the gist of it, even if we're not getting the specific. All right. Well, I guess that's it. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I appreciate you being patient after last week, and in fact, next week it will probably be pre-recorded, so it won't be live, because we are taking a mini family vacation, I think. So it will definitely be pre-recorded, but it'll be available. So, all right. Thank you very much, and until next week, when I kind of see you, have a great night, and peace be with you.